Good morning. Hello, everybody out there in cyber world, whether you're coming at me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube, or whether I'm talking into the void right now and you're going to watch this later. I just want to say hello or listen to this later because it'll also be a podcast at some point. But hello. Good morning and welcome to the Hot Mess Life Coach with your host, Brian Hogan, a hot mess and a life coach. It is really nice to be here with you guys again on this Wednesday morning at 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific. What I want to talk to you guys about today is when setbacks are really setups. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I had a crazy story happen to me last week that kind of inspired this topic because it felt like a huge setback. And then it actually became a huge setup for something much greater, sweeter, kinder, more benevolent from the universe to me. And without having the ability to be adaptable and flexible and shift in my perception on a dime, I would have missed the fact that this setback was actually a huge blessing, like a huge blessing in my life. So this is the show for people that are trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. And one of the ways we can get it together is to remain adaptable, to remain flexible, to yield to the forces around us, and to embrace change, because change is happening so fast. It's accelerating so crazily on this planet right now. And this is how we thrive. We thrive by being flexible and adaptable to change and looking at the things in our life that culture says are setbacks and deciding they're a setup. They're a setup for something. So often what happens to us is we immediately assign meaning to the things in our lives. Like, I got a promotion. Okay, so that's great news. Or I got fired. So that's terrible news. But what if we hated the place that we worked, for example? Then getting a promotion is terrible news and getting fired is great news. So perception makes the meaning mixed with the environment, not the circumstances themselves that happen to us. That's what I've been learning over the last 10 years. That's what I realized. And the more and more that I put this into practice and say, okay, hey, this thing that's happening to me, how is it working for my good? The more I can find the good and see the seeds of good germinating right under the surface and see the truth in the benevolence and kindness of the universe. In Kundalini Yoga, for example, they say everything is meaningless except for the meaning we give our circumstances, events, and our surroundings. So, I mean, it sounds dark at first because culture would be like, well, come on, things are meaningful. We have to make meaning. Let's see things as meaningful. But actually, when you realize things are meaningless apart from the individual observing the event and giving it meaning, it's actually freeing and liberating. It doesn't mean things don't have an inherent meaning, that they don't have value. It means that the meaning we give them is up to us. So in that sense, it's a really freeing thing to say, okay, the event is meaningless until I decide what it means to me. There's a whole branch of psychotherapy that I'm learning about now in my clinical mental health counseling program. And it's called existential therapy, which I love because I'm a philosopher at heart. Like, I love philosophy, all of that stuff. And it states that while life is meaningful in and of itself, there is not meaning assigned to anything, and that individuals imbue their circumstances with the meanings they choose, whether consciously or unconsciously. So now that we have a branch of psychotherapy validating what's talked about in Kundalini Yoga, validating what I've experienced in my own life. So for me, this is how I start to see things now. And if you know from last week, I'm not going to say I'm certain about any of this, but I'm going to say we sort of choose our belief system. And if you're choosing one that you're equally uncertain of that is disempowering, why not try one that's empowering on for size and just see what happens then? So this is important because we can choose to see what culture calls a setback as a setup for something much greater, much more in line with who we are and what we want out of life. So, like, for example, when you look at a person in your life who gets offended by someone's callousness, but someone else just lets it roll off their back, you can see that on some level we imbue the circumstances with meaning. They don't have meaning in and of themselves without our interpretation. Otherwise, we would all react exactly the same way to every single thing at the same time, always. And we'd be like little robots, and it would be boring to be alive. So sometimes it doesn't feel like we can choose our meaning when there's trauma patterns underneath or practice patterns of behavior. But in uncovering those patterns and bringing them into awareness, we regain the power of our choice, and it will start to seem more and more and more self-evident to us that we get to choose. It's not that we are choosing in the moment when things feel out of our control and that we're suddenly to blame. It's that we get to reclaim the power of our choice, and then we get agency. This is not about blame. Blame doesn't enter into a conversation like this. That's, again, culture trying to say, like, well, if it's not this way, it's this way. So are you saying we're blaming people? No, of course not. Not at all. I'm saying we can overcome the trappings of our habitual patterns and choose a better way to be, choose a better way to react, choose a better way to embrace and befriend reality, life, because that's all we have. We have life, we have reality. Whatever your circumstances are now, that is what they are. So we can look at setbacks that happen in our lives and give them a different meaning, a meaning that says, this is happening for me, to enrich me, to teach me, to make me stronger, rather than this is happening to me, to hurt me, to eliminate me, to annihilate me. There's even a verse in the Bible, and if you know me, you know that I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that there's only one way to God. I think that we have infinite pathways to the divine, and it's about embracing that benevolence within all of us. But that being said, the Bible still has a lot of beautiful things in it that are truth. And one of the things it says is, all things work for good to those that love God and live according to his purpose. I love that verse. All things work for good. I think that that's true. And I think we can't tell that when we're stuck in giving things a cultural meaning, or a meaning based on our temporary immediate desire, rather than a meaning based on like a long-term view of like, how is this going to make me stronger? How is this going to make me grow? Something just popped into my head. There is actually research out there. We've all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, there's also something emerging, like new science emerging, about a condition called post-traumatic growth disorder. And there's a lot of science out there to suggest that when we go through something traumatic, the post-traumatic stress disorder comes as a result of not processing it fully. And if we do process it fully, we end up with post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is a way of saying that our resilience gets stronger. And then actually what science is sort of figuring out now is that our ability to navigate future traumas and setbacks is stronger if we've been through past traumas and setbacks and fully processed them. Part of that fully processing is imbuing them with the meaning we choose and want to imbue them with, rather than being stuck in the mindset of our habitual thoughts about how this happened to us and how it's awful. So I just want to be clear, though, this is not about positive thinking. Positive thinking is this toxic positivity, is this way of looking at things and putting a positive spin on them when you don't mean it. That's why it's toxic. So that's not what I'm talking about here with toxic positivity. I'm talking about radical self-acceptance and radical acceptance of your circumstances. Acceptance doesn't mean giving in to them. It doesn't mean condoning them. It doesn't mean approving of them. It just means saying, this is what is. This is what I have to deal with. Let me look at it and let me deal. Carl Rogers, who is the founder of person-centered therapy, another branch of psychotherapy, he said, the paradox of healing is that in order for transformation to occur, you have to accept things exactly as they are. And I have found in my spiritual journey and in my studies and in my personal transformation road that I'm on, that whenever there's some kind of a paradox, there's always truth there. There's always a lot of truth there to be found and to be mined for us. And this is one of those, that in order to heal and make change and make positive change and growth and make things better than they are, you have to accept things now as they are, even if they're crappy, even if they're terrible, even if they're oppressive. It doesn't mean accept them as in surrender to them and give in. It means surrender your resistance to your meaning that it's there, that the universe has done that to you to be awful, and instead give it this meaning of like, this is an opportunity for me to get stronger. This is the gym of life, and these are my reps. It is from this place of non-resistance that all healing begins. In the Tao Te Ching, there's this verse, which I love. I don't know if they call them verses in that book, but whatever, I'm going to call it a verse. And it basically, this is me paraphrasing and maybe butchering it a little bit, but it's something like, when two opposing forces are in battle, the victory goes to the one who knows how to yield. What that means for me is that adaptability, like those who bend will not easily break. Think of a tree in the wind versus a blade of tall grass, right? The more bendable you are, the more likely you are to survive your storms, your hurricanes, your traumas. This bendability is not about knowing or kowtowing rather to other people's whims. It's about standing in your truth while equally allowing others to stand in their truth, whether you like it or not. It is about not arguing with circumstance, but flowing with it, going with it, and trusting that life has you, even when something toxic or oppressive has occurred. So I'm going to read you guys this story. It's like a super short. So it's called The Chinese Farmer, or I think it's called The Chinese Farmer. It's a Zen fable that we've probably all heard, but it's going to just take me a minute or two to read. So I just want to read it through because this encapsulates what I'm trying to talk about. A farmer and his son had a beloved horse who helped the family earn a living. One day, the horse ran away, and their neighbors exclaimed, "Your horse ran away, what terrible luck!" The farmer replies, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned home, leading a few wild horses back to the farm as well. The neighbors shouted, "Your horse has returned," and brought several horses home with him. "What great luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." Later that week, the farmer's son was trying to break one of the horses, and she threw him to the ground, breaking his leg. The neighbors cried, "Your son broke his leg. What terrible luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few weeks later, soldiers from the National Army marched through town, recruiting all the able-bodied boys for the army. They did not take the farmer's son because he had a broken leg. The neighbors shouted, "Your boy is spared. What tremendous luck!" To which the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." So the idea behind this story is that we can look at life circumstances the way the neighbors did and say, this one's good luck, this one's bad luck, this one's good luck, this one's bad luck. Or we can look at them in the way the Chinese farmer did and say, the circumstance is meaningless and I can decide the meaning I give it. Or I can wait and see and just flow and trust and let the universe guide me. And the universe, or the farmer rather, was choosing to wait and see. So I have a "we'll see" story for you guys, which is what brought this topic up. And I want to share this with you because it's sort of hilarious, makes me look kind of like an idiot, but you know, it is what it is. This is the way to have a non-resistant stance to the stupid things that happen to you, or even sometimes terrible things that happen to you, and turn your setbacks into a setup. So I was supposed to go to Mexico last week to visit an old friend of mine who I knew back in California. Oh, before that, I pick oracle cards with my niece every once in a while. She's 8 years old, and she'll just once in a while, she'll be like, "Can we go downstairs and pick a card?" And, you know, I try to explain that the cards are a way of helping guide you towards your own intuitive truth. And they have a message on them, but the message is one. You can give whatever meaning you want to it, just like we're talking about now, and you can interpret it, and you can kind of allow it to inform what's already going on inside you. And so we picked cards on Sunday, a week ago Sunday. I don't remember what her card was, but mine was breach. And it was a picture of this whale, like jumping out of the ocean, like breaching the film of the top of the ocean, and like this beautiful, majestic whale. And it said breach. And she goes, "What does it mean?" And I said, "Well, breach can mean like a breakthrough." You know, and I told her, like, what I'm pulling a card for is like about how my trip to Mexico is going to go, what I'm going to learn there, what it's going to be like. Just, you know, tell me a little bit about Mexico, card deck. And so I got the breach card, and she goes, "What does it mean?" And I said, "Well, you know, sometimes a breach can mean like a breakthrough." Like, and she goes, "Oh, so you're going to have a breakthrough when you go to Mexico." And I was like, "Yeah, I hope so. Exactly. I think you're right. Like, I'm going to have a breakthrough in Mexico. Cool. Like I'll take that." And so a couple days go by, and I'm planning the trip, and I was supposed to leave last Tuesday, which you might remember if you watched or heard last week's show, because I talked about going to Mexico, but it didn't happen. I'm here in my basement in Connecticut. So what happened was Tuesday night, I'm getting ready. I pack everything. I get fully packed. You know, I load the car pretty much, and I'm ready to go. And I grab my passport to make sure I can like have all the proper documents with me. And for a month ago, mind you, I did. I promise I did. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, it expires on Friday. So I would have got to Mexico with a non-expired passport. And then Friday, while in Mexico, it would have expired. And I was like, oh, geez. So what? You know what? They're going to let me out. I'm an American citizen. They're not going to keep me in the country. They don't want extra people in their country. And I was like, so it's fine. I'm going to go and I'm going to get to leave. And there's going to be an exception and it's going to be fine. And I was telling my sister and brother-in-law this. And after I told them, they kind of looked at me like, you're crazy. And so I was like, oh, am I crazy? So I'm going to go back downstairs and do a little thing. So I did a little Googling and I found out they probably aren't going to just let out. That's not how it works. That the documents are important and I need them for a reason or whatever. So I was like, okay, fine. Maybe I should rethink this. So I call my buddy Josh, who goes in and out of Mexico from California, I don't know, 100 times a year or whatever. And so I was like, let me get his take on it. And he was, oh yeah, you're going to get stuck. It's only the US that doesn't want extra people in their country. Mexico doesn't care, you're going to get stuck. And I was like, oh wow, real talk. So he and I talked for a minute and we decided, all right, let's just postpone the trip. I'm going to come in December. We figured out some dates. And then I was like, all right, so I'm going to redo my airfare. I'll have to pay a little bit of a fee. And then the next day I'm going to go to the passport place and start the process to get my new passport, because it'll be like 10 weeks before I go to Mexico, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks actually to get your passport. So I was like, okay, that's a good plan. So I did it. I moved my flight. First thing is I moved my flight. And when I moved my flight, I thought as it was having me choose flights, it was like 176 for this and 200 for this. And I was like, oh, it's going to add like $400 to my flight. Okay, bummer. And then once I clicked like submit or whatever, it turned out that was the exact price of the new airfare. And it actually cut my total airfare in half. So now I have a bunch of money in this like JetBlue travel bank to use at another time for another trip to Mexico or somewhere else. Like, first of all, that's unheard of. Like, I have never in my life heard of a time where somebody messes with an airline, cancels last minute, and gets $400 back. But that's what happened, and that was Tuesday night. And then also, as I was talking to Josh, he told me the weather is cooler in Mexico in December, which is what I like. I'm like really not into hot or humid. He's like, you're gonna like the weather more in December. And I was like, okay, cool, bonus. And he's like, we can arrange some plant medicine ceremonies in December. And I was like, okay, cool, bonus, which is something I've been always wanting to try, like a couple different plant medicines. It's like I consider myself like a public learner and an experimenter. So I'm going to go and try these plant medicines now, which I wouldn't have been able to do had I been in Mexico right now. So suddenly the trip is happening in December and it's taking shape and it's becoming better and better and better. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And then once I realized that and it all sank in, I was like, all right, I also now had cleared this 10 days or 9 days from last Wednesday until tomorrow to be in Mexico. And so suddenly I have a vacation coming up in December and a staycation now happening here because I had cleared my schedule. So I got ahead on all kinds of things this week and I had a relaxed week and I did a lemonade stand with my niece and we went book shopping and like all stuff that I normally wouldn't have time to do because my schedule is a little crazy with grad school. But so the next day I grabbed my passport again, have it in my pocket, and I'm going to leave to go to get the passport process started. And my sister's upstairs and she's just making fun of me a little bit like, oh, I can't believe you did this. And I was like, I know. And I was like, I could swear I had a year left. I could swear that it didn't expire till 2024. And she goes, you mean 2023? And I was like, what? And I rushed over to my bag, pulled out my passport, and I look at it, and it actually expires October 7th of 2023. So it literally wasn't even going to expire, which means I could have gone to Mexico. I could have gone and taken the trip as planned. But so it was a huge setback. And then once I realized all the different ways in which it was going to benefit me, I was like, okay, it's a setup. It's fine. It's a setup. And then when I saw that my passport actually wasn't going to expire and that for some reason I had tricked my brain to thinking it was 2023, I knew that this was a setup and a gift from the universe. And then also And my buddy Josh said, it's going to be whale season in December. So you'll get to see whales, which then reminded me of the card, the Oracle card. And I was like, oh my gosh, the Oracle card. And then the second meaning of breach popped into my head, which is like when things go backwards. And I was like, oh my gosh. So the Oracle card that my niece helped me choose was talking about not so much having a breakthrough, but about all your plans going haywire and going backwards, but actually how that was a setup. And the picture of the whale on there, when I got my buddy's text about it being whale season, excuse me, it was just a confirmation for me that this was truly a divinely orchestrated setup. And I'm telling you this story because I know it sounds exceptional, excuse me, but I think all things that happen to us, if we can look at them and we can just find the seed of growth in there, we can decide to handle it adaptably, flexibly, playfully even, we can find the setup in almost any setback. The pandemic for me is a great example of that. I found life coaching and I found mental health counseling and a whole new path, an adjacent path to my love of screenwriting and film directing. And it's one that I can make happen without so much dumb luck needed to make those bigger dreams come true. So I don't have to be a starving artist. I can be a thriving artist with a business helping people while working on my fantastical dreams rather than being held hostage by them as a bartender or an administrator, which is the jobs I used to do in order to stay focused on my screenwriting. But I realized in the pandemic, I love more than one thing. And so while the pandemic was a setback in a lot of ways for society, it also set a lot of people up. And for anyone who wants to look at it with these new eyes, it can be a setup for you too. Whatever you're going through now can be a setup for you too. So I also got one last Will C story. I had this administrator job for the last couple of years, and it was a great job for a while because as I graduated the film program, I was working as an administrator at the film program, but it's the kind of work that it was. Administration work is not my cup of tea. I'm an artist at heart, and like I don't want my mind divided by a million things. I want to be focused and absorbed like I am right now as I talk to you guys. And so I finally gave notice and I quit that job. I gave him a year's notice, which was like, that was the fear part of me talking like, oh, yeah, how are you just going to quit your job without having another job? So I gave a year's notice, which was being kind and gentle and loving towards myself. When the year was up, I left the job. And 2 weeks later, I made a request to see if I could work in this other role in the department. And they granted my request, which essentially made me an artist in residence working for the same amazing bosses that I had before, but now doing tasks and work and stuff that I love to do, teaching screenwriting classes, running workshops and master classes, mentoring students. And I basically ended up moving into an office twice the size and getting like not really taking a hit in my income at all to suddenly do work I love for way less of a time commitment. So that was also a huge setup. And it could have been a setback. A lot of people, when they leave their job without having another job lined up, it feels like a setback. It seems like a setback. But it's just an example of what can happen if you step out in faith, if you step out being detached from the outcome and deciding, I'm just going to have to follow my heart here. I'm just going to have to. Or if you say, okay, this terrible thing happened that was out of my control, like my passport being expired, and it turns out it wasn't even expired. That was a total misunderstanding, and it was a gift from the universe to me, who now has a much more well-planned, exciting trip to Mexico in December, and also got 10 days of expansive time with my family here in Connecticut. So I would just want to use the last few minutes to answer any questions. So if anybody out there has a question about this topic of when setbacks are really setups, you can go ahead and throw it in the chat now. I got one question from a fellow master coach the other day, so I'm going to read that question and try to answer that one as best I can because it was a heavy and a great question. So Serena asks, how should we feel about setbacks that are from systems of oppression? Are those setups too? This is a great question. This is a tough question. And at first, the first thing I want to do is address the phrasing, how should we feel? Well, let's not should all over ourselves. That's the first thing. We can feel however we want. I'm recommending that we look at them as opportunities, but you get to feel however you want to feel. And no one from the outside should tell you how you should feel. So that's the first thing. So don't take anything that I say as a should or a shouldn't or a command. These are thoughts and suggestions and ideas for how to look at life in a more empowering way. So with that being said, I think we can look at setbacks that come from systems of oppression as setups. Yes, I do think we can, because they're setups on a massive scale. They may not feel like setups to individuals who are oppressed in the moment. And I'm a gay man, so I'm familiar with some forms of oppression. I can't speak to all the terrible forms of oppression that are out there for all the different types of people in the world, but I can speak to this one. And the oppression as an LGBTQ plus community member led me to a deep place of self-loathing for a long time in my life, because society said, I'm not normal, I'm not acceptable just as I am. And working through that self-loathing has made me more and more self-aware, more and more self-gentle, more and more self-loving in a way that's intentional and deliberate and conscious. And that, just like the post-traumatic growth I was talking about at the beginning, has allowed me to be able to be even more adaptable and more flexible whenever new traumas or setbacks or unexpected circumstances happen in my life. So the oppression in society towards LGBTQ plus community members, me included, has made me stronger. Do I like the oppression? No. Do I want the oppression to remain around? No. But can I look at it as a setup? Heck yes. This is what oppressions do when we look for the seed of the setup. We can see how they can become a victory for the oppressed. Nelson Mandela was oppressed for 27 years, being held in jail in South Africa, and he liberated a nation. Viktor Frankl was oppressed in concentration camps, and he went on to invent a type of psychotherapy that is still in use today and has liberated countless human beings, all because they refused to look at their setback as just a setback, as just merely a setback, and they chose to look at it as a setup, even though they were deep in the throes of systemic oppression. Oppression is injustice, yeah, and it's awful, but it is, like all other setbacks, our current reality. So we can start asking ourselves, what is the oppressive system that I no longer resonate with setting me up for? How can I use my power and privilege, if that applies to you, to help make it a setup for those directly oppressed? Oppression, like all forms of suffering, is where growth comes from. We as a species have chosen, for whatever reason, up to this point, to grow and learn through oppression. It's a weird choice, an interesting choice, not the choice I would have made, but it is our current reality. That choice is directly why we are seeing a great crumbling on the planet and seeing in no uncertain terms that oppression does not work. So we can leave that tool, for lack of a better way of putting it, behind once and for all. In that sense, it is the greatest setup we have ever known as a species. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it pleasant or fair, but it is still the single greatest opportunity for an evolutionary leap humanity has ever had. This realization that oppression is flawed, obsolete, and can be finally discarded. That will hopefully spill out into all forms of social control being implemented on the planet and in our country at this time in our history. China's social credit system is oppression. Property taxes are oppression. Sales tax on top of income tax is oppression. Perpetual war without the consent of the people is oppression. For us who are in a country going to war all the time, and for the people being bombed, because it's demoralizing. In working to end oppression against LGBTQ plus and BIPOC communities, we are paving the way for the human spirit to be liberated, to be self-governed and self-reliant in a way we have never experienced before on the planet. Count me in for being part of that setup any day of the week. This is why I end my posts on social media, if you follow me, you know this, with "I trust you, humanity." Because the oppressors have always been outnumbered, and the oppressive systems have mostly been invisible. As they become visible, they will be torn down. It is not an if, it is a when and a how in my mind. And I trust you, humanity, the vast majority of people who do not want oppression, who do not want to be oppressive, who want to use their power and privilege intentionally, deliberately, to change the world, to change the world. I trust you, humanity. This is why I have this show. This is what this is about for me. And I know some of you who are following also feel the same way. So we are part of the Great Awakening. We are witnessing the Great Crumbling, but we are part of the groundswell of a Great Awakening that is going to leave oppression fully behind. Okay, So I don't see any other questions. So I'm just going to leave you guys with that and say thank you so much for tuning in. I love you all. It has been a wonderful half an hour to spend with you. It means so much to me, those of you that tune in, either whether you're listening on the podcast or watching on social media or finding it later and enjoying it. And if you know of anyone who this might benefit, please feel free to share it with them, share it on your timeline, poke, wave, tweet, like, whatever it is you do. Thank you so much. And I will see you next week at 10:30 Eastern in the morning for episode 5 of Hot Mess Life Coach. Thank you so much. This is your favorite hot mess signing off.